Welcome back. I'm Khalil Charles. On Tuesday, Zimbabwe's Environment Ministry stated it is to increase the export of wildlife, including elephants, to China, a move that critics say is stealing from the future generation's natural resources. Adama Munu has more on this.
Ties between Zimbabwe and China have drawn closer on many fronts in the last year, following Chinese Premier Xi Jinping's visit to the country. The two leaders held talks and oversaw the signing of 10 agreements and memorandums covering energy, aviation, telecommunications and investment promotion deals to shore up Zimbabwe's economy, which has fallen into dire straits under President Mugabe's rule. Preservation of wildlife has become the latest link in that chain connecting both countries. But it's a relationship drawing many criticisms from environmental activists and ordinary Zimbabweans.
This act should be brought to account, and the law should substand, and they should actually pay for this sin they have committed.
Zimbabwe's Environment Minister Opa Muchingiri announced this Tuesday the government's decision to increase the exports of elephants to China. The case put forward is what she perceives as Zimbabwe's inability to fully protect its wildlife against illegal poaching activities. And she will apologise to no one. In Zimbabwe's Herald newspaper, she said, "They are our elephants, and our people live with a huge population of elephants and bear the trouble of interacting with them." It is not the first time that Zimbabwe has been hit with controversy concerning wildlife species. Last year, there was uproar over the killing of Cecil the lion, maimed by American dentist Walter Palmer whilst in his den at Huang National Park in Zimbabwe. There was much criticism during the time that whilst the killing of Cecil the lion gained much media coverage, endangered species such as rhinos and elephants were not getting the same attention. Figures by wildlife charities such as Born Free estimate 30,000 to 50,000 elephants alone were slaughtered between 2008 and 2013. And with countries on the continent known to have a vast, diverse range of safari animals, Zimbabwe is fighting a losing battle to keep their herds free from poachers. How then do you interact with animal life that you hardly see if conserving such wildlife is proving so difficult? The answer to that from the ministry also lies in the droughts which have hit the country in recent months, which means that animals such as elephants are also affected by food and water shortages. Officials also believe the sale of animals will raise money for their upkeep. Since July last year, Zimbabwe has sold 100 elephants out of a population of more than 84,000 to China. They were sold for about £26,000 each, according to wildlife officials.
So we're fighting here to preserve a species, but at the same time, there's a market out there. So, we're using money to try and save something, but money is also being used to exploit it. So you need to figure out, how do you solve the problem?
But financial reasons are not the only driving force. China, following its technological agreements with Zimbabwe, may also be able to assist with anti-poaching technology, including the use of drones. So, the practice of exporting wildlife is seen here as part of a wider spectrum of solutions, which have often had their challenges. Last June, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora ruled that a deal to sell 24 animals to China was illegal, but it went ahead anyway. One major concern is how this newfound policy announced this week will in any way help to end the illegal trade of ivory. This trade feeds demands for ivory products, mainly in Asia, but also in Europe and in North America. Despite the first international ivory ban set in 1989, China holds one of the biggest markets for ivory. But last year, there was much momentum for change, with a bilateral agreement between the US and China to end the illegal trade.
我们国家在去年李克强总理在访问非洲时宣布，我们支持非洲国家$1000万作为野生动物保护项目。现在我们正在推进。我们去年还进行了对非洲国家的管理和执法人员到中国来进行。
There has also been a dramatic shift in Chinese public opinion about animal welfare and global wildlife conservation. One such group that represents this shift is that of China House, a social enterprise which works to promote Chinese integration in Africa in ways that benefits both countries on an equal footing. It aims to help Chinese companies to forge positive connections with African communities. One main question remains as to whether there is a space in conservation for shipping animals abroad, leaving countries like Zimbabwe with fewer of its national treasures. Adama, Munu, Africa This Week.
Now to discuss this is Johnny Rodriguez, chairman of the Zimbabwe Conservation Task Force, which helps promote preservation of fishing and wildlife in the country. They've also contributed to projects related to anti-poaching patrols in work with the country's major national parks. We also have on the line Huang, who is the chairman of and founder of China House, who's the first social enterprise and NGO to focus on China-African relations. It aims to help Chinese companies forge positive connections with African communities. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Can I start with Johnny? Johnny, this plan to sell more wildlife to China, has that been accepted by the Zimbabweans in a good way?
No, not really. I mean, the whole thing is, we need ecotourism. We need the tourists here in Zimbabwe, and not to sell these animals to foreign countries. So it makes it easier for the tourists to go there instead of coming to Africa, where it could actually create a lot of employment. And we need the animals here. They belong to Africa, and it's their habitat, it's their social life. So the thing is, it's inhumane to actually export it, and the excuses that are being used is just unheard of.
What are some of the excuses that are being used?
Well, we've got overpopulation, and there's a drought. We can't afford to pay for the anti-poaching because the anti-poaching is becoming so sophisticated. There's so many stories, and this saga carries on.
But isn't there any, sorry to cut you, Johnny, but isn't there any justification behind some of those claims? It is quite a budget to keep anti-poaching activities continuing, and they may be right in what they're saying. Is that not so?
No, it's not, because the thing is, an elephant is quite a delicate, especially the elephant is quite a delicate social life type animals where they belong to the families, and they are born into a family and they die with the great aunts, the grandmothers, the sisters, everybody's together, and they mourn when one passes away. So it's the same as kidnapping a kid in the human side. So there's a lot of studies that have to be done to actually see and let's respect these animals.
But isn't there an argument that by taking them away from that environment and putting in another one, it also adds to conservation because you've got another population elsewhere?
No, not really. I mean, the thing is, the nutrients they need is here. And by taking them, like what we've heard, watermelons and carrots and apples and bananas that are being fed to these animals, I mean, they don't have it in the wild, and it actually cuts their life down to about 30, 35 years, where here in the wild, they live up to 70. So the thing is, an animal, when it's alive here in Africa, will generate anything up to $1 million, $2 million in its lifetime, where you sell it a one-off, that's it, that money's gone, you carry on. But the issue here is that once you finish exporting the animals, what are you going to export next?
Let me ask Hong to come back on that. And I can start by asking you, Hong, why the interest in Zimbabwe and why the interest in wildlife? What's the interest behind that China has?
Well, I think the fundamental question here is not really about China, it's about zoo. Like, do we really believe all zoos should be closed down, or we believe zoos are allowed to operate? And if so, then of course there will be people who want to import animals for their domestic tourism, like zookeeping and so on. So I don't really think it's a question about China at all.
So, but do you think that if someone like China were to take away these animals, as Johnny's saying, that in a sense you're limiting because their habitat, they'll be in the wrong habitat and they won't be able to survive in the same way?
Again, as I said, I believe this is actually the fundamental question is about zoo. So on one hand, as a conservationist, I definitely think like it's not that humane if we consider taking some animal out of their home to somewhere else, like away from their families. But on the other hand, without zoos, many people won't have the chance to see wild animals and won't be able to become interested in wildlife conservation at all. I know it's kind of like ironic, but for example, take the case of me. Like in the past 2 years, I have been working as an undercover investigator on many ivory and rhino horn trade. I was passionate about doing that because I like animal and I like nature. But if there weren't any zoos in China from the beginning, how would I have this interest? So I just think this is like is more complicated than that. I won't be able to say zoo is good or zoo is bad.
So, Johnny, if I can come back to you, thank you for your comments there, Hong, but if I can ask you about Hong's comments, and that is that not having the availability of a zoo to see those animals will take away the interest of people around the world for those animals. How do you respond to that?
The thing is, we've got the responsibility, all the different governments, all the different countries, they've got a responsibility to educate the people. And the thing is, it should be, if you have decent prices that everybody could afford, then they can come and see them in its own habitat. By keeping them in a pen or in a park, it doesn't give you the true reflection of what these animals are about. And they act completely different in its natural habitat. So, we talk about conservation. How do we preserve these animals? The thing is, there's a lot of poverty, and we could actually do a lot by actually kickstarting small projects for these people so that people actually become shareholders of this. And then the governments around the world have to ban all the imports of trophies, of ivory, and stop the export of these animals to different countries. I mean, you're destroying the social behaviors, you're destroying the family units, and at the end of the day, the people that remain behind are the ones who are going to have the problem with these animals because they've got a hell of a memory, and they start attacking humans because they know the humans are the ones that's actually causing this family breakup.
That's quite dangerous. I mean, what you're saying there is essentially by moving it out of its natural habitat and moving it into the area where it's not familiar with, it could cause it problems. But I want to ask you, Johnny, is your concern around taking the animals away, is it the question of the natural habitat that you're concerned with? Because surely, if that habitat can be enacted, if you like, in a different part of the world, then you'd have essentially the same situation that they were living in.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that, but the thing is, you're destroying a whole family units to do that. And the thing is, like the excuses that is going now that, there's a drought and because of the El Nino and there's whatever the problem is. The issue is if we are the true guardians, we should be able to be professional enough to actually make an assessment and make sure that we've got sufficient haze and whatever the nutrients in reserve so that if it does come a drought, we know we are prepared for it. Where at the moment it's just poor excuses.
But surely this is the point, Johnny. Johnny, sorry to interrupt, but surely this is the point. It's the affordability, the ability of the government of Zimbabwe in this instance to be able to pay and maintain these animals. And surely in a country which has been hit by a number of economic kind of crises, this is one of the areas that it can't afford to keep up and to maintain.
Well, it can't, because the thing is, I mean, it's the same as the agricultural side where you had professional people doing it. They've been removed. The minerals have all been sold. Now we're going into the wildlife. What else are we going to go into? Start selling all the trees and timber. Where is it going to be stopped? The whole issue here is that there is a problem. There's big poverty. There's 90% of the people unemployed. How come we're not trying to raise the standards of poverty and let people actually have the same benefits as everybody? And these animals have got the right to live in the areas that they're born.
So what, if I can put that point then to Hong in terms of the where you are in Kenya, in terms of providing for the local people, how would you respond to the points that Johnny just made?
Well, for me, I don't think it's actually a very sufficient reason if you say you have to sell the wildlife because your country is poor. I totally don't think that should be a reason at all.
So what is the reason for selling it? What's the reason that you would accept? Because obviously China does have some interest. I know you're broadening it out to other countries, but obviously there is an interest for China. And why do you feel that's vindicated and justified if it means it's going to lead to the problems that Johnny has been talking about?
Well, again, I think when we are talking about this topic, we really should be very careful because first, if we believe zoos are okay, it's really not a question about China at all. And I believe China, the interest to having elephants in the zoos, there's no difference between China or US or many other countries. We really should not make it a China-specific question. Secondly, I don't think China has the interest of bringing baby elephants, elephants to China at all. It's some of the Chinese people. It's not really China and not Chinese government. I believe we should not mix up between different kind of Chinese people. There's no such person as China. And for example, many people believe, many other foreigners, they may think all Chinese, they don't care about conservation. They all buy ivory, but that's not the case.
Let's bring up this point. Let's bring up this point, Hong, about ivory and the of course, in parts of the world, in most of the parts of the world, the ivory is banned. But China is one of the very few countries that still accepts ivory and still looking for ivory products. You also mentioned there that you were working undercover to bring out poachers in this area. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
More about, well,
the work that you were doing, as well as the response to the poaching and ivory products that China seems to still be very interested in.
Well, essentially, for the past few years, what I have been doing personally is I work with quite a few of investigate organizations, like the Wildlife Justice Commission and so on. I did quite a few of undercover investigation on the ground about the trade, and I sometimes even help arrest some of the poachers, not poachers, more traffickers. On the other hand, as China House, what we have been doing is we have been trying to engage the Chinese populations in Africa to participate in conservation and be against the ivory trade and so on. And what we have found out is most of the Chinese people, they are actually against the ivory trade. But it's just because China is so big, so even a very small percentage of Chinese people who would be buying ivory and so on would create a feeling that all Chinese people are the same. And I believe right now, in terms of the government, Chinese government is now on the way to ban this ivory trade based on the policy change we have seen in the past 1 year. This is something very clear.
That's very interesting. How soon do you think such a ban could come in force?
Well, it's really difficult to say because I'm not the government, so I don't know.
Of course not.
We have seen the sign. Xi Jinping and Obama, they just signed something and they declare that they are going to fight against this. And in China, we have seen quite a few of temporary trade has been enacted. And that is a sign that the government is now thinking about doing so. And as a Chinese, of course, I totally believe that China should ban the ivory trade completely.
Indeed.
But I believe this is similar to the topic about importing elephants to the zoos. Ivory and elephants to the zoos are totally different topics based on my perception.
If I can go, thank you indeed. If I can go back to Johnny there and the concerns about poaching and indeed the concerns about the ivory trade, is that one of the issues that you would be concerned about if Zimbabwe were to decide to increase the number of wildlife sent to China?
Yeah, well, it is a concern. The thing is that, there's two big markets in the world, which is America and China. And, I mean, this is not accusing individuals. This is the greed and the people that actually utilize these animals in an inhumane, really cruel way of actually keeping these animals only for the entertainment of the people. That's not educational. The whole thing is, if people want to find out, I mean, by doing exchange of students and people to come and see how these animals act in their own habitat, it's a completely different story to what you see in the zoos and the people that are actually making money out of it, and it doesn't go into conservation. And this is quite a big issue, because the two leading countries that are the biggest ivory buyers have to put a law in place to actually stop it. And then let's sit around the table, let's negotiate, because the thing is, the ecotourism brings a lot of money, and that actually helps the country's economy. It actually benefits the people that are living in poverty. There's so many things that can be done. It can be vice versa. And, we've got a lot of sun. Why aren't we using it to light the villages that live around the wildlife areas? Why aren't we making them shareholders?
I understand that point.
Animals,
Johnny, if I can take you slightly, sorry to interrupt, but if I can take you slightly back to the question of the trade in ivory. In a sense, the decision by the government, the Zimbabwe government, does this undermine the integrity? No, I shouldn't say that word, integrity, but does this undermine the plans by China and the United States to stop the trade by increasing the amount of wildlife, and in particular elephants, going towards these regions? Are they not working, if you like, against the interests of the trade in ivory?
A lot of the people, are Zimbabweans themselves, haven't seen an elephant in the wild. So, this is a big topic where you've got a government that's in place that doesn't actually use sciences and looks at the what you call it, you lead the country by example, and it's not being done. The easiest way of making quick money, that's the route that's taken. So, there's a lot of issues. This topic will carry on for a long time. There's a lot of issues, a lot of problems. We have to stop this, the trophy imports, and we have to stop the export of ivory. Otherwise, this carnage is not going to stop, and majority of these animals are going to become extinct.
And that will be, a terrible situation. I mean, last year, of course, there was a lot of interest in lions, and Cecil, of course, was unfortunately killed. Why do you think there's not that same kind of interest with elephants?
There is. The biggest thing is, it was like a lion, like a sleeping worm. The whole thing is people didn't know. And the issue today is that the independent, as we call it, news reporters on the media, on the electronic media, the people don't have just to rely on the radio and TV and the actual newspapers, because now people are actually communicating with one another, and it is beneficial because now nobody can do anything without being under the watchful eye of the populace. So the actual under the scrutiny of the world. So it is. It's like I said. The Cecil didn't die for a reason. He died for a cause. It's going to change the laws. More and more people are being aware of what's going on, and let's go for it. I mean, everybody's got the right to live, and so everybody's got the right to life.
If I can go back then to Hong, thank you very much indeed again, Johnny, for those comments. Hong, with regard to the work you're doing with conservation work at China House, what are some of the other projects that you're involved with throughout the African continent?
Well, essentially what China House do is essentially why I started China House is I see now Chinese are everywhere in the world, especially in Africa, everywhere you go, you see the Chinese. But however, although they are here, there are many conflicts and many misunderstandings between the Chinese and local communities. So what China House is doing, we are trying to break this kind of misunderstandings and to help the Chinese integrate. So essentially, we help the Chinese companies to understand the local law, local labor law, and so on, and help them to understand the environmental law. We help them do CSR. And then on the NGO side, we work with NGOs to help the NGO, especially environmental NGO, to engage the Chinese in Africa, to let them be part of the solution. That's essentially what we are doing.
Do we have any assurances that you can improve the relationship between the Africans and the Chinese?
Of course. that is something that is done so few in the past. That's why now there are so many misunderstandings. For example, a lot of Chinese in Africa, they believe a lot of for example, foreign media, foreign NGO, they will not listen to the Chinese. They will just insist on their bias because all they want to do is to attack the Chinese. But that's not true. On the other hand, many local people, many press and international NGO believe all these Chinese, they are all buying ivory, all these Chinese, they do not respect local people, and that's also not true. But even just going to these people and speak out that there may be a different answer is already changing a lot, especially later more and more when we bring the Chinese communities in Kenya to actually participate in the wildlife conservation volunteering, such as desnaring and clean up of the animal habitation center and so on. The people the Chinese and the locals, they get to meet each other, know more about each other, and they get to work together. I can see there's a lot of things could be done in this area.
Okay, I've got one final question to ask you both, and I'll ask you first, Hong, and then I'll come back to Johnny. And that is with regard to conservation. Do you feel that there is a space for conservation to keep endangered species and to protect endangered species, and it may mean that you might have to transfer wildlife to different places? Is there an avenue, is there a space to do that?
Well, for me, I really don't think it's a good idea to transfer the wildlife species from one place to another because you want to protect them. I really don't think that is a good idea. I believe the local place should do its best to try to keep the habitats and so on. That's your responsibility as the manager of the country.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Johnny, how would you respond to that?
Well, I agree with Mr. Huang, because the thing is, this is the way it should be. We have to learn from one another, and by everybody uniting and working together, that's how we are going to achieve problems. There's too many conflicts in Africa where the animals have suffered because of this, and then the government's use excuses, let's do this, let's do that, and it's all for the wrong reason. So, like I say, there's a lot of room and there's space that we have to try and learn from one another and do the right thing. And the right thing is to leave the animals where they do belong, and that's in the wild, in its own habitat. We'd love to see anybody come, and we'll teach them and show them how everything is done. It's the same as the different ethnical tribes that you've got. We have to understand. They've got different traditions, different customs. Let's respect that, because if we respect that, we respect ourselves too and our fellow men.
Thank you very much indeed. On that note, Johnny, I'd like to thank you and Hong for taking part in this discussion. Now, moving on, we have another feature story that also looks at wildlife in Africa. The Angai forest in Tanzania is one of the country's largest remaining Miambo woodlands. Yet for years, this 144,000-hectare forest has been plagued by illegal logging and unmanaged charcoal production. But local communities in the country have been taking matters into their own hands, and that has earned them this year's prize, the Equator Prize, for coming up with novel solutions to promote sustainable development. Here's an insight into their story.
The Angai Forest, Tanzania, is one of the country's largest remaining Miombo woodlands. Yet for years, this 140,000-hectare forest has been plagued by illegal logging and unmanaged charcoal production. Knowing their long-term survival depends on the forest, local communities are finding ways to protect and profit from this valuable resource. Miombo woodlands cover much of central and southern Africa. Oak-like trees, or Miombo, dominate the dry ecosystem of grasslands, savanna and shrub. The Angai is home to a population of approximately 30,000. They rely on the forest for food, medicine and firewood. Yet for over 20 years, successful attempts to control deforestation have failed.
Baadhi ya viumbe vinaanza kutoweka. Ukiangalia kwenye baadhi ya milima yetu, kuna wanyama ambao sasa hivi hata kuwatafuta inakuwa ni ngumu sana kuwapata. Tunaangalia hata swala ambao walikuwa ni wengi katika jamii yetu, ila sasa hivi wameanza kutoweka kutokana na haya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Kwa hiyo ni muhimu kwa sisi kuanza kuhifadhi misitu yetu kwa ajili ya kulinda viumbe hai wasitoweke kutokana na haya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi.
Tanzanian charity Matandu wa Jamii wa Usimamizi wa Misitu Tanzania, Mujamita, is working with communities dependent on the forest to help them manage the resources more sustainably. They recognize the link between a healthy forest and a healthy environment.
Kutokana na kuanza kuhifadhi hii misitu yetu, basi tunaona kabisa kuwa haya mabadiliko, kuwepo wa misitu inasababisha ongezeko la mvua katika maeneo husika. Kwa hiyo kuna mahusiano makubwa sana kati ya misitu na vile vile ongezeko la mvua. Na ongezeko la mvua hasa kwa jamii ambayo inategemea kilimo, hiko ndio kitu muhimu sana kimazingira.
Ulaya Mubunyi is one of the villages that's benefiting from Mujamita's work with sustainable forest products. These include honey production and controlled grazing. The village have changed their approach to how they treat the woodland. Now it is viewed as an asset with a long-term value that needs to be treasured, rather than one providing short-term income. A Natural Resources Committee has been set up to safeguard the asset. Under the guardianship of the committee, sustainable use of the woodland is managed. Specific areas are set aside for recovery. The committee collects payments from those using the woods to generate income, and the money is allocated between village infrastructure projects and forest conservation. In Ulaya Mubunyi, the income from the Miombo woodlands has paid for waterworks and a primary school classroom. It's also funded a tree nursery so the forest can be replanted. Villagers believe the measures are already helping mitigate climate change.
Kwa hiyo unaweza kukuta maeneo mengine hata mvua, nyakati za mvua zimebadilika kwa sababu ya uvunaji wa mara kwa mara, na unakuta sehemu nyingine hata kilimo kimekuwa ni hafifu, wanashindwa kupata mazao kwa sababu mvua hazinyeshi kwa wakati. Kwa hiyo hususan mradi huu ulivyofika, miradi mingi, watu wengi na maeneo mengi, mikoa mingi imefaidika na mradi huu. Sasa hivi watu wanavuna na mvua zinanyesha kwa wakati.
Having promoted community ownership of the forests and shown tangible benefits for village communities and producers, Mujamita has helped secure the future of the Angai forest. In doing so, local people feel less at risk from climate change.
The impact of climate change has no geographical boundary. It affects almost everyone, but the developing countries are much affected. So we need to have a joint effort so that they can have an ability of dealing with this impact of climate change.
Well, we hope to bring you more stories like that. That was very interesting about the situation in Tanzania. Well, I'm afraid our time is up, but I'd like to thank my guests for joining us on the show and to you at home for watching. Gabon star striker Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang upstaged favourite Yahya Toure to win the first African Player of the Year award. It was certainly sweet revenge for him after he lost the 2014 prize to Toure, who scooped the individual accolade in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. OK, until next week, enjoy your evening.